You are listening to Confessions of a Counselor podcast. Here we will talk all things mental health in bite-sized chunks. Hello and welcome to Confessions of a Counselor. I'm your host, Janice, and in today's episode, I thought we would talk about something that we all encounter, something that we all experience, but often struggle to understand, and that's the topic of grief. So let's jump right in. Grief is a word that carries so much weight, and there's a lot of conversation around it, a lot of what to do and how to experience and what does grieving look like. Should we go to therapy? How does therapy help? How are we supposed to deal with it? And I think there's so much weight to it, there's so much emotion to it, and it really isn't a one-size-fits-all. It's not this thing that we can then describe and say this is how we manage grief, because it's such a personalized experience to the individual. So when we think of grief, we can understand that we can grieve so many different things and grieve it in so many different ways. So we can grieve the end of a relationship. We can grieve the loss of a job. We can grieve the departure of a friendship. We can grieve the loss of a dream or shattered expectations. There's so many different things that we can grieve. So when we're looking at the term of grief, really we're attaching that to the loss of a person, the loss of a thing, the loss of an experience, and whether that loss is just that's no longer in our life or they're no longer with us. Grief is a much broader term than I think we've typically talked about in the past. And I think that slowly we're kind of catching on to this idea, but it's this kind of slow transition into understanding what is grief. So grief isn't just about death. It's the rupture of connection. It's the loss of something, the absence of what was. So I think that it's really important to remember that grief is so deeply personal, right? There's no right way or wrong way to grieve. And I think that that's been pretty common in the experience, but there's no timeline, there's no expectation, there's no, this is how we grieve. Each person's experience is going to be different, even if we're facing the same loss that someone else is experiencing as well. It doesn't mean that they're going to be the same. So sometimes that's going to mean that there's waves of emotion that come through that become overwhelming or overstimulating. And at other times, it might just be this kind of aching in the background, this background running experience of loss or that rupture of connection. So oftentimes when we're talking about grief, we hear about the 5 stages of grief. And I think that these are really insightful stages. And there's a couple of things I want to debrief about the 5 stages of grief. So we hear about the stages of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So those are our 5 stages: anger, denial, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And while these are helpful in understanding the common emotional responses that we have, it's crucial to remember that grief is not a linear process. So we don't go through these stages one step at a time. We don't fluidly move through them and go from one end to the other and then grief is done. We don't progress neatly from one stage to the next and then you're over that stage and it doesn't come back. These stages are more helpful to identify the feelings that are normal, and there isn't a right way or a wrong way to grieve through these feelings, but they're also not stages. It's a framework. It's more cyclical in nature. So I might go from depression and then go back to anger and then move through bargaining and then come back to anger again. And then now I'm in depression again. And then I might have some acceptance and then an anniversary happens and I'm back in anger, right? So it's more of a cycle and jumping through and understanding that all of these feelings are normal and okay to experience when we're having grief. So it's not a guaranteed experience. It's a framework of understanding how grief presents itself or how the experience of grief might look. So what can we do when grief inevitably touches our lives? How do we understand grief and kind of take on the importance of grief? So firstly, we want to be kind to ourselves. Allow ourselves to feel whatever it is that we're feeling without judgment. So don't push the emotions away. We don't want to stuff anything. We don't want to say this isn't okay, this isn't acceptable. We really want to amp up the self-compassion in this time, that all feelings are okay and that they might not make sense, and that's perfectly normal, if you will. Second is that we want to seek support during this time. Again, it can be confusing and hard and complicated, and again, not make sense a lot of the time. So we want to go into this experience with support. So whether it's talking to a trusted friend or family member, joining a support group, speaking with a therapist, there's many different ways that we can seek support, but we really want to amp up that support system of people who can support us through this experience. You do not have to go through grief alone, even if it's not the loss of a loved one, even if it's not grief for death. We always want to seek support no matter what the grief process is. So sometimes just knowing that someone is listening without trying to fix anything can be so important and exactly what we need. Third, we want to allow for the small moments of comfort and joy to start to re-enter our lives. I think that sometimes we judge when joy starts to show up in our lives again, like we're moving on too quickly or we're going to forget the thing that we are grieving. When joy starts to re-enter our lives, we want to acknowledge it and let it come back in because it's a part of the human experience. It means that you're acknowledging that life continues even after grief, and that's such an essential skill and tool to add into our experience of grief. Finding those small moments of peace and pleasure can be restorative and healing in nature when we're allowing them without judgment. So it can be so many different things: enjoying a walk in nature, listening to a favorite song, engaging in a hobby, seeing a friend. Even just a simple cup of tea can all be so restorative in nature. These aren't distractions, they're acts of self-compassion. So I often describe grief as like a ball in a jar. So if we imagine like kind of like a big mason jar and it's got a ball inside of it, and grief is the jar being shaken and the ball hitting up against the sides of the glass. So as the ball moves around, it's sometimes hitting the side and sometimes it's not. And in the beginning stages of grief, the ball is hitting the glass a lot because there's nothing else in the jar. And as we start to process grief, and as we start to allow these small moments of joy, as we start to move through all the different feelings that we experience with grief, our jar starts to fill up with other things. So the ball becomes more stabilized in the jar. So we start to add connection, we start to add hobbies, we start to add friendship, we start to add new experiences, and grief is hitting the sides less often. Not that the experience of grief is less. We're still feeling that sadness or that anger or overwhelm in that capacity, but it's happening less often because as we're shaking that jar, there's other things in it with that ball of grief. So the frequency of the experience of grief becomes less and less over time. So we start to build this life around the grief. Not that the grief is shrinking, but the life becomes about what's happening around that grief. So grief is a testament of love. It's a pain that we feel because we deeply valued someone or something. And while it can feel isolating and overwhelming, it's a universal human experience that connects us and connects us to that person or that thing that we loved. If you're grieving, please know that you are not alone in this. And if someone you know is suffering, the best thing we can do is to just be there, to show up and be a presence. Ask for what they need. Show up with some food, whatever that looks like. We don't need to do much and we don't need to fix anything. All we need to do is be there for that person. So I hope that you found today's episode about grief helpful. And until next time, be gentle with yourself. Do something that reminds you of the person or the thing that you are grieving. Until next time, take care. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Confessions of a Counselor podcast is available anywhere you like to listen to your podcasts on Apple and Android. New episodes are released every Friday. If you enjoyed today's episode, please join the conversation. Leave a review or subscribe to the podcast hosted on Spotify. You can find all these details on janicelyons.com. Until next time, take care.